A first-class cabin. Two brilliant black teenage sisters on the trip of a lifetime. One gatekeeper who decides they do not belong. What happens when a simple request for orange juice becomes a line in the sand at 30,000 feet? When a phone and a trembling hand connects to a father whose voice can turn a jet around. When a crowded cabin must choose between silence and truth. Meet Naomi and Leah Ellis, winners in the lab and newcomers to a room that was never built for them. Watch as calm courage collides with quiet contempt. Ask yourself who speaks up, who looks away, who pays the price, and who finally writes the rules. Is justice loud, or is it a whisper that refuses to disappear? If you are ready for a story about prejudice, meeting power in real time, about dignity defended and consequences delivered, hit like, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more true stories where courage changes the flight path. Now, let us begin. The first-class lounge at New York Liberty International Airport smelled faintly of leather and espresso. Soft golden lights glowed from recessed ceilings, and the muted chatter of business travelers filled the air. Naomi Ellis had to stop for a moment at the glass doors when she and her twin sister Leah wheeled their small matching carry-ons into the space. For 16-year-olds who had spent most of their lives surrounded by the rhythm of classrooms, neighborhood basketball courts, and public libraries, this place felt like a different planet. Naomi scanned the room, her eyes flicking across men in navy suits tapping furiously on laptops, women with diamond bracelets raising champagne flutes, and attendants moving with the silent precisions of ballet dancers. Her lips parted into a small grin. "This is wild," she whispered to Leah. Her sister's answer was quieter. "It feels like we don't belong here." Leah adjusted her glasses, clutching a worn paperback she had carried everywhere for months. The book was about theoretical physics, but right now she wasn't reading a word. She was calculating. Always calculating. How people looked at them, how long their gazes lingered, what it meant to be the only two black teenagers in a lounge designed for executives and millionaires. Naomi, on the other hand, had no interest in shrinking herself. She had inherited their father's fire, a natural confidence that sometimes made people uncomfortable. She tugged Leah's arm gently. "We belong here because our tickets say so. Dad said first class was the reward. We earned this." The reward was more than just a flight. They were bound for the International Young Innovators Summit in London. For a year, they had poured themselves into a project on sustainable water filtration, late nights hunched over lab notebooks, trial after trial in the school's underfunded science wing, weekends filled with debates about particle membranes instead of mall trips. Against all odds, they had won at the national level. And now, two young black girls from Newark, New Jersey, were about to present their work on an international stage. Naomi
Welcome
tossed her
aboard.
braids back
Are you both finding
and marched
everything all
toward
right?
a row of
Yes,
empty
thank you.
seats upholstered in soft gray leather.
Just checking
She
our seat
plopped down,
assignments.
crossing her legs with practiced ease, while Leah sat gingerly beside her, her backpack carefully balanced on her lap as though afraid the sleek space might reject it. Naomi glanced at the food station. Macarons in pastel shades, croissants that looked flakier than anything from their local bakery, sparkling water in glass bottles. She smirked. "You know," she murmured, "I could get used to this. Free macarons. Yes, please." Leah didn't laugh. She was scanning the room again. A man at the far corner glanced over, then returned to his phone.
Welcome aboard. Are you
A
both
woman in
finding everything all
pearls
right?
let her eyes
Yes,
drift
thank
to
you.
them before turning away. Her mouth
Just
pressed
checking
in
our
a
seat
faint line.
assignments.
Leah's shoulders tightened. Naomi noticed and leaned closer. "Don't start overthinking. They don't matter. We matter. Our project matters." Leah wanted to believe her. She really did. But the familiar knot of tension in her chest reminded her that places like this came with invisible signs: who was welcome and who was tolerated. Their father, Victor Ellis, should have been here with them. But the CEO of Horizon Global Logistics had been forced to stay behind because of an urgent contract dispute. He had insisted the twins travel first class without him. "You've earned it," he told them on the phone, his voice warm with pride. "Travel in comfort. I'll meet you in London in 2 days. Go make me proud." Naomi could still hear his voice in her head. It had given her strength in a way little else could. Their father wasn't just a man, he was a force. People listened when he spoke. Entire supply chains shifted because of his decisions. And though Naomi admired him for his power, she also admired him because when it came to her and Leah, he was just Dad. A soft chime broke through their thoughts. The boarding call for Aurora Airlines Flight 228 to London Heathrow rang out, polite yet commanding. Naomi's heart skipped. She looked at Leah, eyes bright. Showtime. They gathered their things, double-checked their passports, and joined the priority lane. Around them, frequent flyers swiped their phones with practiced efficiency, their briefcases and Hermes bags sliding along effortlessly. Naomi tightened her grip on her carry-on. "Keep your head high," she whispered to Leah. The jet bridge hummed with air conditioning. As they stepped onto the aircraft, a uniformed attendant greeted them. She was in her mid-40s, blonde hair twisted into a bun so tight it pulled at her temples. The nameplate on her jacket read Harper Steel. "Welcome aboard," Harper said. Her tone was crisp, her smile mechanical. Her eyes flicked to the boarding passes on Naomi's phone, then back to their faces, for the briefest moment. Something shifted in her expression, a flicker of hesitation, a faint arch of her brow. Then, just as quickly, it vanished. "First class is this way." Naomi led the way, her chin up, Leah trailing quietly behind. Their seats 1A and 1B were magnificent pods at the very front, complete with reclining beds, screens the size of televisions, and neatly folded cashmere blankets. Naomi sank into hers with a sigh of triumph. "Now this," she whispered, "is how you fly." Leah, however, felt the weight of eyes on them. She glanced toward the galley and saw Harper watching, her lips pressed into a thin line. She was speaking quietly to another passenger, a woman in a pale designer suit whose face barely moved beneath layers of cosmetic work. The woman's gaze followed Harper's, landing squarely on the twins, her expression one of faint disdain. Leah swallowed hard. She recognized that look. It was the look that said, "You don't belong here." Naomi saw it too. But instead of shrinking, she sat straighter. "Let them look," she murmured under her breath. "We're going to London. Nothing's stopping us." At least, that's what she thought. The hum of the jet bridge vibrated beneath Naomi and Leah's feet as they moved forward with the line of passengers. A cool stream of air conditioning swept over them, carrying with it the faint scent of jet fuel. Naomi walked with her shoulders back, her chin lifted, radiating a confidence that wasn't entirely real, but convincing enough for anyone who might look their way. Leah, a half step behind, gripped the strap of her backpack so tightly that her knuckles showed white. First-class boarding always carried a kind of ritual. Attendants waited at the cabin door with perfect posture, smiles like uniforms themselves. Harper Steele stood in the center, her navy suit pressed so crisply it almost looked like armor. Her bun hadn't shifted a single strand, and her pale blue eyes scanned each boarding pass like an inspector. When Naomi extended her phone with the glowing barcode, Harper's smile appeared, tight and professional, but it stopped just short of her eyes. First class. Seats, 1A and 1B. Harper said. Her voice had the flat efficiency of someone correcting an error before it had time to grow. Welcome aboard. Naomi caught the fractional hesitation. It lasted less than a heartbeat. But it was there. That moment when Harper's gaze moved from the glowing screen to the faces of the two teenagers standing before her, as if something didn't compute. Thank you, Naomi replied evenly, slipping her phone back into her pocket. She didn't miss the way Harper's lips pressed tighter, as though the word had been unnecessary. Leah followed silently. Her eyes lowered, and together they entered the cabin. First class stretched before them like another lounge, but one designed for the sky. Pods of beige leather and brushed chrome lined either side of the aisle, each one a cocoon of privacy. The overhead bins gleamed. Screens the size of televisions glowed with a looping welcome message. Every detail had been engineered to whisper privilege. Naomi breathed it in. This is insane, she muttered. Insane, Leah repeated softly, though her tone carried none of Naomi's excitement. Her gaze swept the cabin quickly, instinctively mapping faces. A man in a suit leaned back with his whiskey already in hand, scrolling through emails. A younger woman in a silk blouse adjusted her diamond bracelet as if ensuring everyone nearby could see the sparkle. And then there was the woman Naomi had glimpsed earlier in the lounge. She was seated across the aisle in 1C, her platinum hair smooth and rigid, her tailored cream jacket looking as if it had never dared wrinkle. The name on her boarding pass, briefly visible as she had lifted it to the scanner, had read Margot Whitfield. Margot's gaze found the twins almost instantly. Her lips curved upward, not in a smile, but in something smaller, more brittle. It was the kind of look someone gave when they believed they had already evaluated you and filed the results away under not my kind. Naomi ignored it, sliding into 1A. She pressed the seat controls just to hear the quiet whir of technology obeying her touch. Leah settled into 1B, setting her paper back on the side console as though needing something familiar in this alien space. The hum of boarding continued around them. Bags thudded into overhead bins. The muted rhythm of shoes moved along the carpeted aisle. Naomi leaned closer to her sister. See, totally fine. We're here. We belong here. Leah nodded, but her lips were pressed tight. She reached for the water bottle at her seat and twisted the cap just to occupy her hands. From the galley, Harper Steele reappeared, her posture sharp enough to slice paper. She exchanged quiet words with Margot Whitfield, who leaned toward her, an almost conspiratorial tilt to her head. Whatever Harper said made Margot glance over at the twins again, this time with open curiosity tinged with disdain. Naomi felt the weight of that look. She chose to meet it directly, raising her brows in a silent challenge before turning back to Leah. Her sister, however, had already noticed Harper's thin smile and the quick glance in their direction. The knot in Leah's chest tightened. Don't, Naomi whispered. Leah blinked. Don't what? Don't shrink. That's what they expect. Sit tall. Leah inhaled slowly and straightened a little, though her fingers still fidgeted against the water bottle. Just then, another attendant appeared. He was younger, maybe mid-20s, with warm brown skin and an easy smile that seemed out of place in Harper's regimented world. His name tag read Caleb Ortiz. Ladies, can I offer you a pre-departure beverage? Caleb asked, voice genuine, eyes kind. Naomi brightened. Orange juice, please. Leah gave a small smile. Just water. Thank you. Caleb nodded. You got it. He turned toward the galley, but before he could reach for the tray, Harper intercepted him. Her hand touched his arm lightly, but the gesture carried command. She leaned in, speaking in a voice pitched too low for the twins to catch. But Naomi saw the sharp shake of Harper's head, the dismissal in her posture. Caleb glanced back toward them, apology already written across his expression, before retreating to the back of the cabin. Naomi felt heat rise in her chest. She sat forward slightly, eyes narrowing. "Did you see that Leah nodded once? Don't say anything yet." Moments later, Harper approached them. Her professional mask was firmly in place, her hands folded before her like an emblem of control. "I'm sorry," she said, the words drained of sincerity. "We're running behind on pre-flight checks. Beverage service will begin once we're in the air." Naomi frowned. "But the man in 2D has a whiskey already." She pointed discreetly to the suited passenger swirling his glass. Harper's eyes sharpened. "He is a platinum-tier executive flyer with us. Certain courtesies apply. We need to prioritize." The word lingered like a slap. Prioritize. Naomi felt her jaw tighten, but she forced a thin smile. "Of course," she said lightly. "No problem." Her gaze shifted to the folded blanket at her seat. She lifted it and pointed at a faint smudge along the edge. "Could I get another one of these? This one looks stained." For a moment, Harper's composure faltered. She took the blanket, examined the nearly invisible spot, and then folded it crisply. "The blankets are prepackaged and sanitized. There is nothing wrong with it. We do not have an unlimited supply. You'll have to make do." She placed it back on Naomi's ottoman with surgical precision before turning away. The dismissal was absolute. Naomi's lips parted in disbelief. Leah's stomach clenched so tightly she thought she might be sick. Across the aisle, Margot Whitfield smirked into her champagne glass, as if the evening's entertainment had just begun. The cabin doors closed with a pneumatic hiss. The safety video began to play, cheerful animations that felt almost mocking against the tension settling over seats 1A and 1B. Naomi adjusted her seatbelt, but her eyes never left Harper Steele. The
Welcome
flight
aboard.
attendant was laughing
Are you
now
both
with
finding
Margot,
everything all right?
pouring
Yes,
her
thank you.
another glass. Leaning in close,
Just checking our seat assignments.
Naomi leaned toward Leah, her voice low and steady. "This isn't about juice. It isn't about a blanket. You know what this is." Leah pressed her lips together, eyes glistening. She whispered back, "Please, just let it go. 7 hours. We can handle it." Naomi shook her head. "No, we can't. Not this time." The engines roared to life, vibrating beneath their feet. The aircraft began its slow push from the gate. Around them, passengers settled in, oblivious or willfully blind. But in the space of
Welcome
1A
aboard.
and 1B,
Are you both finding everything all right?
silence and
Yes,
fury
thank you.
coiled like storm clouds waiting to break.
Just checking our seat assignments.
Naomi's hand curled into a fist beneath the blanket Harper had insisted she make do with. She had tried being polite. She had tried being patient. Now she was done. She knew in her gut. This flight was not going to be simple. The aircraft eased backward from the gate, the faint jolt reverberating through the cabin. Naomi shifted in her seat, her body taut with quiet tension. She had been watching Harper Steele's every movement since the moment the attendant folded that blanket and placed it back on her ottoman with such dismissive finality. Naomi had grown up with a father who negotiated billion-dollar contracts, and she had learned to read people. Harper's smile had not been that of a professional who was too busy. It had been something colder, deliberate. Across the aisle, Margot Whitfield lifted her glass again, her smirk like a secret shared with Harper. Naomi's stomach clenched, but she refused to look away. She leaned toward Leah. "Did you notice how she skipped us?" but poured Margot champagne twice. Leah nodded faintly, her fingers twisting the hem of her cardigan. I noticed. I notice everything. But please, Naomi, don't escalate. Not here. Naomi exhaled through her nose, trying to cool the fire in her chest. She reached for the in-flight magazine, flipping it open just to have something to do with her hands. The glossy pages blurred before her eyes. Minutes passed. The safety video ended. Attendants checked seatbelts, and Harper walked down the aisle with an air of authority that seemed to hover around her like a second uniform. Naomi felt her pulse quicken when Harper stopped at row 2 to ask a man if he wanted a refill before takeoff. The man chuckled, raising his glass. The amber liquid caught the light as Harper bent down, her smile warmer than it had ever been toward them. Naomi turned her head, unable to stop herself. Her voice came out sharper than intended. "Excuse me." Harper's head snapped around. "Yes." Naomi lifted her chin, keeping her tone steady. "I thought you said no drinks until we were in the air." The entire cabin seemed to freeze. The man in seat 2D lowered his glass, his brows knitting slightly. Harper's smile tightened. "Sir is one of our executive-level clients. Certain courtesies apply. Courtesies that don't apply to us," Naomi said evenly. Leah tugged at her sister's sleeve. "Naomi, stop." But Naomi couldn't. The injustice pulsed through her veins like an electric current. "We asked politely. You told us we had to wait. But he doesn't have to. Can you explain why a ripple of silence spread through the cabin?" The man in 2D glanced between Harper and Naomi, looking uncomfortable. Across the aisle, Margot's smirk widened. She set her champagne glass down carefully, as if settling in for a performance. Harper's professional mask cracked for the briefest instant. Her eyes narrowed, her lips pressed tight. Then she straightened. "Miss, I've already explained the policy. Now please sit back and allow us to prepare for departure." Naomi leaned forward. "No, you haven't explained anything. You just said he's important enough to deserve courtesy." "Are we not important enough?" Leah whispered urgently. "Naomi, please." Her voice trembled, her face pale, but Naomi stayed locked on Harper, refusing to break eye contact. Margot chose that moment to interject, her voice carrying clearly through the cabin. "Oh, for heaven's sake," she drawled. "The entitlement of children these days is astonishing. If you can't afford the ticket, you shouldn't be sitting here. Perhaps you've wandered into the wrong cabin." Leah's breath caught like a punch to the stomach. Naomi froze, her mind flashing blank for a moment before fury surged through her veins. "We are in our assigned seats," Naomi said, her voice low but firm, "and our Father paid for them. We're not asking for special treatment. We're asking for the same respect you're giving everyone else." The man in 2D shifted in his seat, clearly unsettled. He glanced toward Harper as if expecting her to correct Margot, but Harper said nothing. Her silence was loud. Leah felt her chest tighten. Every instinct told her to disappear, to shrink into invisibility, to let Naomi handle it. But something broke inside her. She unbuckled her seatbelt, her voice trembling but audible. "She's right. We're not being disruptive. We're not being entitled. We just asked for water and juice. Why are we the only passengers denied?" The sound of Leah's voice startled Naomi. Her sister rarely spoke up in conflict. Naomi looked at her, a flicker of pride warming her fury. But Harper seized the moment. "That's enough," she snapped, her posture sharp. "You are delaying the flight. If you cannot remain seated and respectful, I will have to inform the captain that you are disruptive passengers." The words landed like a blow. Disruptive passengers. The phrase that carried weight in aviation. A phrase that meant security, removal, headlines. Naomi's heart pounded in her ears. For a moment, her confidence wavered. Leah stared at Harper, stunned, removed. For asking a question. Margot laughed softly, the sound brittle as glass. Standards must be maintained. This is first class, not a classroom rebellion. Naomi felt heat crawl up her neck. She looked around, hoping someone would intervene. Someone would acknowledge the absurdity. Most passengers avoided her eyes, sinking deeper into their seats. But one man didn't. 3 rows back. A tall figure with salt and pepper hair and a dark blazer lowered his newspaper. His eyes locked on Naomi and Leah with a quiet intensity. Thomas Reed had been silent the entire boarding process, absorbed in his work, but he had seen everything. He leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. "I've been sitting here since they boarded. These young ladies have been nothing but polite. The hostility has not come from them." Harper stiffened. "Sir, this is a crew matter. Please remain uninvolved." Thomas didn't back down. "It became my matter when you started treating paying passengers like criminals. I will gladly give my account to the captain." Naomi's breath caught. Relief mingled with her fury. At least someone saw them. Harper's jaw tightened. Her authority had been challenged, and in her world, that was unacceptable. "Sir, with respect, you are not privy to the full context. Please allow us to handle our cabin." But Thomas Reed only shook his head slightly, his eyes steady. "I've seen enough context, and so has everyone else here." The aircraft continued to taxi, the engines rumbling beneath them. Yet the tension in the first-class cabin was louder than the roar outside. Naomi sat back slowly, her pulse racing. Leah's hands trembled in her lap. She glanced at her sister, her voice barely a whisper. "What do we do now?" Naomi's jaw set. "We hold our ground. Across the aisle." Margot rolled her eyes, muttering under her breath about wasted time. Harper turned sharply toward the cockpit, her shoulders rigid, her entire body radiating fury. Naomi leaned close to Leah, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "This isn't over. Not even close." The engines hummed with a steady vibration as the aircraft inched along the taxiway. Outside the window, the lights of the airport flickered in long rows, a trail of yellow and white leading toward the runway. Inside, the cabin was hushed, but not peaceful. The air itself felt charged, as though every molecule waited for the next spark. Naomi sat stiffly, her seatbelt biting into her waist. Her eyes followed Harper Steele as the attendant moved briskly toward the cockpit. Each step Harper took seemed measured, final, like a gavel preparing to strike. Naomi's jaw tightened. She knew what Harper was going to do. She was going to frame them as the problem, distort the truth until the captain saw nothing but disruptive teenagers. Leah noticed her sister's clenched fists. "Naomi," she whispered urgently, "please don't push this further. You saw her. She's ready to call the captain. If we're taken off this flight, we won't get to London. We'll miss the summit. All of it will be gone." Naomi turned to her, her eyes burning with both anger and conviction. "Leah, it's not about juice or blankets anymore. It's about respect. You felt it too. The way she looked at us, the way she dismissed us. If we let it slide, we're telling her she can treat us this way." Leah's voice trembled. "And if we fight, we might lose everything. Do you really think anyone in this cabin will back us up besides that one man? Everyone else is pretending they don't hear." Naomi glanced at the other passengers. She saw lowered eyes, the polite retreat of people who wanted no part in conflict. They were all wrapped in their own bubbles of comfort, unwilling to risk disturbing them for two girls they didn't know. She hated it, hated how cowardice dressed itself as civility. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. Pick your battles wisely, Naomi, but once you pick them, don't back down. She drew in a deep breath. We already picked this battle. Leah pressed her palms together in her lap, her stomach twisting. She wanted so badly to believe her sister, but fear weighed her down. Fear of being seen as troublemakers, fear of missing their moment in London, fear that power always tilted away from them no matter how right they were. Harper disappeared into the cockpit, the door shutting with a solid click. Naomi's gaze stayed locked on that door, waiting for what she knew would come. Leah leaned against the window, staring out into the darkness, her breath fogging the glass. She felt small, insignificant, a dot in a world that didn't want her to shine. Margot Whitfield broke the silence, her voice lilting with amusement. Well, this is quite the drama for a simple flight to London. One would think we're starring in a soap opera. Though really, I must commend the crew for trying to maintain standards. Naomi's head snapped toward her. Standards? Margot arched a perfectly shaped brow. Of course, first class is not for everyone. There are expectations of behavior, of
Welcome
decorum.
aboard. Are you both
It is
finding
not a
everything
playground
all right?
for teenagers
Yes, thank you.
throwing tantrums over juice boxes. Leah
Just
flinched
checking
at
our
the
seat
words.
assignments.
Juice boxes. The deliberate infantilization stung. She stared down at her hands, shame fighting with anger in her chest. Naomi, however, sat straighter. Her voice came out calm, each syllable deliberate. We're not throwing tantrums. We asked politely for the same service given to everyone else. You just don't like that we noticed the difference. Margot gave a small laugh, sipping her champagne. You notice too much? That is often the problem. The exchange was cut short by Harper's return. Her posture was
Welcome
rigid,
aboard.
her
Are you both
face set
finding
in
everything
lines
all
of
right?
authority.
Yes, thank you.
She stood at the front of the cabin and spoke
Just
with
checking
sharp
our seat
precision.
assignments.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing a brief delay as the captain reviews a situation. Please remain seated. Murmurs rippled through the rows. The man in 2D frowned, setting down his glass. Thomas Reed folded his newspaper again, watching intently. Margot smirked as if she had just been vindicated. Harper's eyes locked on Naomi and Leah. You two need to remain in your seats and refrain from further disruption. Naomi's breath came sharp. We didn't disrupt anything. Leah tugged her arm again. Naomi, stop. Please. But Naomi's voice rose slightly. All we did was ask why we were being ignored. That's not disruption. That's called standing up for ourselves. Harper's expression hardened. You are testing the patience of this crew. If you continue, the captain will have no choice but to request that you be removed from this flight. The word removed dropped like a stone. Leah's chest tightened, her throat dry. Images flashed through her mind being escorted off the plane, missing London, disappointing their father, losing everything they had worked for. Naomi felt the weight too, but her fire didn't waver. She forced herself to breathe slowly, evenly, though her heart was racing. So that's it. You can serve everyone else, laugh with them, pour drinks. But when we ask for basic courtesy, suddenly we're disruptive. The cabin had grown utterly silent. Even the hum of the engines seemed distant. Thomas Reed finally spoke again, his calm voice a lifeline in the tension. With respect, I believe the captain deserves to hear more than one side of the story. These young ladies have conducted themselves with far more grace than they're being given credit for. Harper glared at him. Sir, I must insist. But Thomas's steady gaze didn't falter. No, I must insist. Fairness is not optional." For the first time, Harper faltered. A flicker of uncertainty crossed her features before the mask snapped back in place. She turned sharply and strode toward the cockpit once more. Naomi sat back, adrenaline coursing through her. Her hands trembled beneath the blanket. She hated that her body betrayed her even as her mind stayed sharp. She whispered to Leah, "We're not wrong. We can't let them make us believe we're wrong." Leah's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. Her voice cracked. "I know we're not wrong, but being right doesn't always save you." The words pierced Naomi. For all her fire, she couldn't deny the truth of them. She thought of her father again, of his calm certainty, his way of bending the world when it refused to bend for him. If he were here, this wouldn't even be happening. Her phone sat in her pocket, a lifeline waiting to be grasped. She hadn't touched it yet. She wasn't ready to admit defeat, but a seed of thought took root in her mind. Maybe she wouldn't have to fight this battle alone. The engines rumbled louder, then steadied. The plane paused on the taxiway, waiting. The captain's voice finally came over the intercom, calm but firm. "Cabin crew, please report to the flight deck." Naomi and Leah exchanged a look. Harper was gone again, this time with the weight of authority behind her. Leah whispered, "Naomi, what if they really take us off?" Naomi's throat tightened. She reached for her sister's hand, squeezing it firmly. "Then we fight. One way or another, we fight." And for the first time, Leah squeezed back with equal strength. The plane sat motionless on the tarmac, engines humming, a giant frozen in place as two teenage girls braced themselves for whatever judgment would come through that cockpit door. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the aircraft continued to wait on the taxiway. The plane had not moved forward in several minutes. Naomi could feel the eyes of other passengers flicking toward her and Leah, then darting away again. They weren't just invisible anymore. They had become a spectacle. Naomi inhaled deeply, trying to calm the pounding in her chest. Harper had gone back to the cockpit, but she would return soon. Naomi knew she couldn't simply sit there and let the humiliation harden into silence. Silence had never been her way. If she allowed Harper's behavior to pass unchallenged, then it would confirm what Harper and Margot already believed, that Naomi and Leah didn't belong here. Her eyes fell once again on the folded blanket at her seat. The faint smudge on the corner was barely noticeable, but to Naomi it represented something more than a piece of fabric. It was a chance to test, to prove what she already suspected. She shifted slightly, picking it up between her fingers. Leah caught the movement. "Naomi," she whispered, her voice urgent. "Don't. Please, let it go." Naomi shook her head slowly, her eyes never leaving the galley. "I need to see. I need to know if I'm imagining this or if it's real." When Harper returned, her posture stiff, Naomi lifted the blanket with measured calm. "Excuse me," she said, her tone polite but firm. "This blanket has a stain. Could I get another one? Please." Harper stopped, her pale eyes fixing on Naomi as if she had just been challenged to a duel. She took the blanket, examined the tiny smudge with exaggerated scrutiny, and then folded it crisply back into its square. Her lips pressed into the thinnest of smiles. "The blankets are prepackaged and sanitized. There is nothing wrong with it. We do not have an unlimited supply. You'll have to make do." She placed the blanket back on Naomi's ottoman as though sealing the conversation shut. Naomi felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she kept her face neutral. "Thank you," she murmured, though every word scraped against her throat. Across the aisle, Margot let out a small laugh, not loud enough to be called rude, but loud enough to be heard. She tilted her glass toward Harper in a silent toast before sipping. Leah's hands tightened into fists in her lap. Her sister had been right. It wasn't about the juice, and it wasn't about the blanket. It was about something deeper, uglier, and now undeniable. The plane's engines pulsed, then quieted again. They still hadn't moved. The passengers around them shifted in their seats, restless. Thomas Reed leaned back in row 3, his newspaper forgotten entirely. His steady gaze had never left the front of the cabin. Naomi leaned close to Leah, whispering through clenched teeth. "You saw that. She wouldn't even pretend to treat us fairly. She wanted us to know." Leah swallowed hard. Her voice was low, fragile. "And now what? What are we supposed to do? Naomi, if she calls the captain again, they'll say we're the problem. Everyone already thinks we're being difficult." Naomi's chest heaved. She thought about their project, the summit, the pride in their father's voice when he told them to travel in comfort. She thought about the years of hard work that had brought them here, and she thought about how quickly, how casually, Harper had tried to strip them of dignity. Her father's advice rang again in her mind. Choose your battles. But she hadn't chosen this one. Harper had. Margot had. The moment they decided that Naomi and Leah didn't belong, the battle had already begun. Naomi straightened in her seat, her voice quiet but resolute. "Then we make sure they see the truth. Everyone in this cabin. They can pretend not to notice, but they can't ignore us forever." Margot's voice cut through the silence like a knife. "Honestly," she said, her words dripping with disdain, "if you're so unhappy with the service, perhaps first class isn't for you. Economy might be more accommodating." Several passengers glanced over, their expressions uncomfortable but silent. Nobody spoke against her. Nobody told her to stop. Naomi felt Leah's fingers clutch at her sleeve. Her sister's eyes shimmered, on the verge of tears. Naomi covered Leah's hand with her own, steadying her. Then she turned to face Margot, her voice cool and steady. "We're in the seats our father bought for us. We have as much right to be here as anyone else. That's not up for debate." Margot arched her brow, her smile brittle. "Right. Of course. Rights are such fashionable things to claim these days." Thomas Reed's voice came again, calm but firm. "That's enough." Every head turned toward him. He folded his hands on the table in front of him, his eyes sharp. "These young ladies are passengers. They've done nothing more than ask for basic courtesy. If you can't handle that, the problem is not theirs." Margot gave a small scoff, but Thomas's steady gaze silenced her. For a moment, the cabin seemed to breathe again. Naomi felt a flicker of gratitude, though her body was still tense. She had always known Leah was the thinker, the one who saw details others missed. But Naomi understood people too, and she knew Harper and Margot weren't finished. Leah leaned close, her voice almost inaudible. "Naomi, please, I can't go through this for 7 hours." Naomi wrapped an arm around her sister's shoulders, pulling her close. "We won't have to," she whispered. "I promise." The engine shifted again, the low roar signaling movement. But the plane didn't roll forward. Instead, it paused once more. Naomi felt the tension coil tighter in her chest. Something was happening. Something bigger than the juice, bigger than the blanket. She reached into her pocket and touched her phone. The familiar weight steadied her. If Harper thought she could break them down, she was wrong. They weren't alone. They never had been. Leah saw the movement and shook her head quickly. Don't Not yet. Dad's busy. He can't fix this. Naomi's eyes narrowed, her hand tightening around the phone. He told us to call if there was ever a problem. This is a problem. Leah's breath hitched. What if it makes everything worse? Naomi looked at her sister, her voice low and fierce. What if it makes everything better? The cabin remained tense, the hum of the engines like the steady drumbeat of approaching conflict. Harper hadn't returned from the cockpit yet, but Naomi knew it was only a matter of time. The battle lines had been drawn. She squeezed Leah's hand again,
Welcome
her
aboard.
expression calm,
Are you both finding
but her
everything all
mind
right?
racing.
Yes, thank you.
They had been underestimated
Just
from the
checking our
moment they
seat
stepped into
assignments.
this cabin. But Naomi Ellis had no intention of staying quiet. And as the plane lingered on the taxiway, caught between departure and return, Naomi realized something profound. They weren't just passengers anymore. They had become a test of fairness, of prejudice, of power. And this test was about to reach its breaking point. The plane had grown unnaturally still, as though it was holding its breath. The engines hummed, but there was no forward movement. Naomi felt the vibration beneath her seat like a heartbeat.
Welcome
Steady,
aboard.
yet
Are you both
impatient.
finding everything all right?
Yes,
Around
thank you.
her, the passengers shifted,
Just checking our
glancing
seat
at one
assignments.
another in discomfort. When Harper Steele returned from the cockpit, her posture was sharper than ever, her uniform immaculate, her authority radiating like steel beams. She stopped at the front of the cabin, her gaze cutting through Naomi and Leah as though they were the only people on the plane. "Ladies," Harper said, her tone precise, "I've spoken with the captain regarding your behavior. He has been informed that you are creating a disturbance. If this continues, you will be removed from the aircraft before takeoff." The words fell heavy. Leah's heart dropped. Removed. Her hands shook as she clasped them together, her eyes flickering to Naomi in panic. She imagined security guards waiting at the gate, escorting them out while other passengers whispered. She imagined missing London, missing the summit, losing everything they had worked toward for months. Naomi sat straighter, forcing her voice calm. "We have not created a disturbance. We asked for water, for juice, for a blanket without a stain. That is all. If that is considered disruptive, then the problem is not us." Harper's lips thinned into a near line. "Your tone is aggressive. You are refusing to comply with crew instructions." Naomi leaned forward slightly. Aggressive. For speaking up, for asking questions, for refusing to be ignored. Leah tugged at Naomi's sleeve, her whisper urgent. "Naomi, please stop. They'll take us off." But Naomi couldn't. Her pulse was racing, her mind alive with fire. She had spent her whole life being told to be twice as good, twice as polite, twice as patient, just to be treated as equal. And here, at the edge of everything she and Leah had built, she was being reduced to a caricature, loud, aggressive, unworthy. Thomas Reed's calm voice broke the silence again. "Excuse me, but as a witness, I can confirm that these young women have been respectful. Their questions were fair. Your response, however, has not been." Harper turned to him, her composure tested. "Sir, I appreciate your input, but this is a matter of safety. The captain must trust the judgment of his crew." Thomas's brows rose. "Safety. Asking for a blanket is a safety concern." Several passengers murmured, shifting uneasily. A ripple of doubt was moving through the cabin. Harper's authority was still intact, but cracks had begun to show. Margot Whitfield let out a dramatic sigh, her voice dripping disdain. "Honestly, this is absurd. We're all being held up because two children think the world revolves around them. Perhaps if their parents had taught them manners, we wouldn't be in this situation. The insult hit Leah like a lash. She flinched, her face burning with humiliation. Naomi felt a surge of protective rage, but she forced her voice steady. "Do not talk about our parents. You know nothing about us." Margot smirked into her champagne. "I know enough," Naomi wanted to shout, wanted to tear down the smugness written on Margot's face. But she caught herself. She thought of her father again, of his calm authority, the way he used silence as a weapon. She drew in a breath and let it out slowly. "We're not leaving," Naomi said, her tone even, her gaze locked on Harper. "We are in our seats, in first class, with tickets that were paid for. If you want to remove us, you'll have to explain why, and not just to the captain, to everyone here." Her words hung in the air like a challenge. A few passengers glanced at one another. Thomas Reed's expression softened, a faint nod of approval. Harper's face flushed, though her voice remained controlled. "If you continue to refuse instructions, I will have no choice but to escalate this matter. You are already delaying departure." Naomi lifted her chin. "No, you are delaying it, because you chose to make this personal." The tension was unbearable. Leah felt trapped between fear and admiration for her sister. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the window, trying to steady her breathing. In her chest, two voices fought for dominance. One begged her to surrender, to make it stop, to escape humiliation. The other whispered that Naomi was right, that silence would mean complicity. Her eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. She whispered, almost to herself. "Why does it always have to be us?" Naomi heard her, the words cutting deep. She placed a steady hand on Leah's shoulder. "Because they think we're easy targets, but we're not." The engine shifted, the plane rolling slightly before halting again. The intercom crackled, the captain's calm voice filling the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay. We are holding momentarily for a crew matter." The phrase "crew matter" echoed like a judgment. Every passenger knew what it meant now. The whispers started, quiet but sharp. Eyes turned toward Naomi and Leah, some curious, some annoyed, some sympathetic. Naomi felt the scrutiny press against her skin, but she didn't shrink. She refused. Harper disappeared into the cockpit again, her step sharp with irritation. Naomi sat still, but inside her chest her heart thundered. She had held her ground. But for how long Harper had the ear of the captain, and the captain had ultimate authority. Leah finally turned from the window, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Naomi, what if they win? What if we're dragged off this plane in front of everyone?" Naomi hesitated, the question piercing through her armor. She thought of the summit, of the stage waiting in London, of their project, of the recognition they had dreamed of for so long. The idea of losing it all because of Harper's prejudice gnawed at her insides. Her hand slipped again into her pocket, fingers brushing against her phone. Her father's face appeared in her mind, steady and unyielding. He had told them to call if there was ever a problem. She had resisted until now, wanting to fight on her own, to prove she could. But maybe this was bigger than her, bigger than Leah, bigger than both of them. Leah saw the movement and shook her head quickly, her whisper urgent. "Don't call him. He's busy. He can't change this." Naomi's voice was soft, steady. "He can. You know he can." Leah's chest constricted. She knew her sister was right. Victor Ellis was not just their father. He was a man whose words could move industries, whose contracts carried weight that corporations couldn't ignore. But what terrified her wasn't that he couldn't fix it. It was what would happen when he did. The phone remained in Naomi's hand, her thumb hovering over the screen. She looked at Leah, her eyes fierce, but also questioning. "Tell me not to, and I won't." Leah stared back, torn between fear and hope, between the dread of humiliation and the desperate need for justice. Her lips trembled. "I just don't want us to lose everything." Naomi leaned closer, her whisper like steel. "We already are." The cabin door to the cockpit clicked open. Harper reemerged, her face taut, her movements precise. Naomi slipped the phone back into her lap, hiding it beneath the blanket. The time hadn't come yet, but it would. And when it did, Naomi knew she would press that call without hesitation. The cabin had settled into a brittle silence, one of those silences that was less about peace and more about fear. Every eye in first class seemed to hover near Naomi and Leah without truly looking at them. Conversations had stopped, as if the passengers were reluctant to be caught on the wrong side of a moment that was no longer just about a glass of orange juice or a stained blanket. It had become something heavier, a test of power, of belonging, of truth. Naomi sat very still, her hand under the blanket, her phone warm against her palm. Her thumb rested on the edge of the screen. The weight of the decision pressed on her chest like the cabin air had thinned, leaving less room to breathe. Leah leaned close, her voice trembling. "Please, Naomi, don't. If you call him, everything will spiral. What if they make us leave before he can even do anything? What if people think we're weak because we couldn't handle it ourselves?" Naomi's eyes burned, not with tears, but with a quiet fury that had simmered since boarding. This isn't about weakness. It's about refusing to be erased. They want us silent. Leah, if we stay silent, then Harper wins. Margot wins. Everyone watching, pretending not to see, wins. Leah pressed her hands to her knees, struggling to contain the storm inside her. She thought of the summit in London, of the project they had built together, of the hours of experiments, failures, and breakthroughs. Missing it would mean watching their year's work vanish. But another thought clawed at her too, the years of lessons from their father, who had taught them to stand tall, to know their worth, to refuse to bow their heads to anyone who tried to tell them they were less. Her voice was small. And what if calling him makes everything worse? Naomi looked at her sister, her gaze steady, unwavering. "Then at least we'll know we didn't let them break us alone." She tapped the screen, finding their father's contact. The picture that lit up was one Leah knew by heart, Victor Ellis in his crisp navy suit. His tie loosened slightly. A smile caught mid-laughter. It was a photograph taken by Naomi on a summer afternoon, a reminder that beneath the steel of a CEO was a father who adored his daughters. Naomi pressed the call button. Leah's heart pounded so loudly she was certain the passengers around them could hear it. She wanted to stop her sister, but the ringing had already begun. Once, twice, and then his voice filled Naomi's ear, warm and alert. "Naomi, honey, shouldn't you be in the air by now?" Naomi inhaled slowly, steadying her voice. "Dad, we have a problem." The warmth in his tone shifted instantly, transforming into a controlled seriousness Leah had heard only a few times before. "What kind of problem?" Naomi's eyes flicked to Leah, then to Harper, who stood near the galley speaking in low tones to another attendant. She
Welcome
lowered her
aboard.
voice.
Are you both finding
"We
everything
asked for
all
drinks
right?
before
Yes,
takeoff.
thank you.
Everyone else was served.
Just
We
checking our
weren't.
seat assignments.
We asked for a clean blanket. She refused. Then she told us we were disruptive. She threatened to remove us from the plane. There was silence on the other end, the kind of silence that vibrated with restrained power. Naomi's chest tightened. For a moment she wondered if she had made a mistake, if even he couldn't help them now. Then his voice came, calm, but carrying the weight of thunder. "Put Leah on." Leah froze when Naomi extended the phone. She took it with shaking fingers, pressing it to her ear. "Dad." His voice softened
Welcome
slightly.
aboard. Are you both
you all
finding
right?
everything all right?
Yes,
"Sweetheart."
thank
Leah bit her lip.
Just
"I don't
checking
know.
our seat assignments.
They said we're disruptive, that we might be taken off. We didn't do anything wrong." Victor's exhale was sharp, controlled. "You listen to me. You sit in your seats. You don't argue anymore. You don't raise your voice. Do you understand?" "Yes, Dad." "Good. Stay calm. Let me handle the rest." Leah passed the phone back to Naomi, her hands trembling. Naomi clutched it like a lifeline. "Stay on the line," Victor said. "Do not hang up. I want to hear everything until this is resolved." Naomi nodded instinctively, though he couldn't see her. Her shoulders loosened just slightly, relief washing over her. For the first time since the confrontation began, she felt the faintest glimmer of safety. Victor's voice changed again, harder now, the voice of the man who ran boardrooms and commanded empires. "I'm going to make some calls. Stay silent, both of you. Let them underestimate you. Let them think they've won. Just wait." Naomi swallowed, her voice barely a whisper. "Okay." The call went quiet on his end, but the line stayed open. Naomi kept the phone against her thigh, hidden under the blanket, across the aisle. Margot leaned toward Harper, speaking in a voice pitched just loud enough to carry. "This is ridiculous. The captain should have them removed immediately. It's setting a terrible precedent." Naomi clenched her jaw. Leah pressed her face against the window, fighting the sting of tears. The captain's voice came over the intercom again, calm but taut. "Cabin crew, we will be holding position briefly. Please remain seated and await instructions." Passengers murmured, restless now. A man muttered about missing connections, another about wasted time. The tension wasn't just Naomi and Leah's anymore. It was rippling outward. Harper returned from the cockpit, her expression unreadable, though her eyes narrowed when she glanced at the twins. Naomi forced herself to look down, appearing calm, just as her father had told them. Leah copied her, though her heart pounded. Minutes passed, each one stretching like an eternity. Naomi could feel the energy shifting, though she couldn't see how. Then it happened. The engine's steady roar lowered, the pitch changing. Instead of accelerating forward, the plane began to ease backward, turning away from the runway lights. Gas filled the cabin. Whispers surged like a wave. Naomi and Leah exchanged wide-eyed glances. Harper froze, her face blanching as realization struck. Leah clutched Naomi's arm. "We're going back." Naomi's heart leapt into her throat. She slid the phone to her ear. "Dad, did you—" Victor's voice was calm, almost cold. "Stay seated. They'll handle it from here." Harper's mask cracked for the first time. Her lips parted, confusion flickering across her face as she looked toward the cockpit, then back at the passengers, then finally at the twins. Margot's smirk faltered. "What's happening?" she demanded. Though no one answered, the captain's voice returned over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to a customer service matter that must be resolved on the ground, we are returning to the gate. Please remain seated." The phrase customer service matter rippled through the cabin like a thunderclap. Passengers exchanged glances, some irritated, others curious. A few suddenly aware that they had witnessed something more serious than they'd realized? Naomi's pulse raced. Leah's breath came fast, shallow, but neither spoke. They remembered their father's words, "Stay calm." Let them underestimate you. As the plane rolled back toward the terminal, Naomi realized the balance of power had shifted. Harper knew it too. Her eyes, once cold and certain, now darted nervously toward the cockpit. For the first time since boarding, Naomi felt taller. Not because she had shouted, not because she had forced her way through, but because she had called the one person who would never let her be silenced. The phone buzzed softly. Victor's voice came again, steady as steel. Good. Now watch what happens next. Naomi tightened her grip on Leah's hand. For the first time that night, she believed him. The cabin lights brightened slightly as the aircraft made its slow turn back toward the terminal. The subtle shift in engine pitch was unmistakable. Instead of powering forward toward the runway, the Boeing 747 was retreating. For most passengers, the realization landed quickly. Something unusual was unfolding. Whispers rippled through the rows. A man in business attire muttered about missing his connection in Heathrow. A woman sighed heavily, clutching her designer handbag tighter, clearly annoyed. Some passengers craned their necks toward the front of the cabin, curious but unwilling to voice questions. The silence that followed was filled with tension, thick and palpable. Naomi and Leah sat perfectly still, just as their father had instructed. Naomi's phone rested hidden beneath her blanket, still connected to Victor Ellis. She could hear his quiet breathing on the line, his presence steady even across the distance. It was like an invisible shield wrapped around them. Leah pressed her forehead against the window, her reflection staring back at her with wide, uncertain eyes. She wanted to feel relief at the plane turning back, but all she felt was the weight of uncertainty. What would happen when they reached the gate? Would they be forced off in front of everyone? Would Harper's version of events win? Harper herself stood near the galley, her composure visibly strained. The rigid set of her shoulders betrayed nerves she couldn't quite mask. She whispered something quickly to another attendant, who nodded uneasily before slipping into the cockpit. Harper's eyes flicked toward Naomi and Leah more than once, sharp and suspicious, as though trying to solve a puzzle she couldn't quite piece together. Margot Whitfield finally spoke, her voice slicing through the air. "This is outrageous! An entire aircraft inconvenienced because of two spoiled children. I certainly hope the airline knows what kind of precedent this sets." Naomi's jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. She remembered her father's words. "Stay calm. Let them underestimate you." Leah, however, shrank deeper into her seat, humiliated by Margot's tone. Thomas Reed lowered his newspaper again, his steady gaze settling on Margot. "Madam," he said evenly, "I would suggest you stop speaking. You're not helping." Margot blinked, her cheeks flushing faintly. She opened her mouth as if to argue, but Thomas's calm authority silenced her. She lifted her glass instead, draining the last of her champagne with a huff. The plane rolled slowly toward the familiar glass windows of the terminal. The sight of the jet bridge reappearing outside was surreal. Naomi's heart raced. The engines powered down to a low hum as the aircraft stopped at the gate. The cabin door clicked. Every passenger turned their eyes forward when the door opened, not to a flight attendant or a casual gate agent, but to two uniformed security officers and a tall man in a tailored suit. His expression was grim, his brow damp with sweat as if he had run through the terminal. He scanned the cabin quickly, his eyes landing on Naomi and Leah. Then he turned his gaze toward Harper. The air in the cabin seemed to freeze. Naomi's phone buzzed in her hand. Victor's voice came through softly, though firm. "That's David Layton, Senior Vice President of the airline. He'll take it from here. Stay quiet." Leah gripped Naomi's arm, her breath sharp. Dad knew they'd come. Naomi gave the faintest nod, her pulse hammering. The suited man stepped fully into the cabin. His voice carried across the space, smooth, yet edged with steel. "Good evening. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is David Layton. I am an executive with this airline. On behalf of our company, I sincerely apologize for the disruption to your flight. There are matters that must be addressed immediately." Passengers shifted in their seats, some murmuring with confusion, others clearly intrigued. David's eyes returned to Harper, his tone hardening. "Miss Steele, please gather your belongings." A sharp intake of breath rippled through the cabin. Harper's face went pale. "Sir, I don't understand. I was following protocol. These passengers," she gestured sharply toward Naomi and Leah, "were disruptive, aggressive. I was maintaining order." David's expression darkened. "I've received reports. I've also spoken with corporate leadership. This is not about protocol. This is about conduct. You've compromised this flight and our company." Harper's throat worked as she tried to swallow her panic. "Sir," if I could explain, David's voice cut her off. Calm but merciless. "You will have that opportunity in a formal setting. Not here. For now, you are relieved of duty. Security will escort you from this aircraft." Gas filled the cabin. Even those who had tried to stay detached were now leaning forward, captivated. Harper's authority, so firm minutes before, crumbled in real time. Her lips parted, but no words came. Slowly, with trembling hands, she reached for her crew bag in the overhead compartment. Naomi watched, her body thrumming with adrenaline. She had dreamed of this moment the moment Harper's cold dismissals were exposed for what they were. Yet instead of triumph, she felt something colder. Pity. Harper had built her power on exclusion, and now it was collapsing, leaving her small and brittle. Margot Whitfield's face twisted with disbelief. "This is absurd. You're actually punishing your own crew for maintaining standards. Do you realize who my husband is? This will not stand." David turned toward her, his gaze unflinching. "Madam, your comments to other passengers have been documented. You will also deplane." The cabin gasped again, louder this time. Margot's mouth fell open. "You can't possibly. I'm a paying customer. I have done nothing wrong." David's tone remained icy. "You verbally harassed other passengers. This is not optional. Gather your belongings." Margot sputtered, looking desperately to the passengers around her for support. But all
Welcome
she
aboard.
saw were
Are
averted
you both
gazes,
finding everything all right?
eyes
Yes,
avoiding
thank you.
hers, faces closed off.
Just checking our seat
Even
assignments.
those who might have sympathized earlier now recoiled, unwilling to align themselves with someone being publicly shamed. Thomas Reed cleared his throat softly. "I'll confirm," he said. "I witnessed everything." The girls were polite. The hostility came from Miss Steele and this woman. David nodded curtly. "Thank you, sir." Margot's hands trembled as she clutched her designer handbag. She muttered curses under her breath as she shoved her shawl into her tote. "This is unacceptable. My husband will hear about this." No one replied. Harper,
Welcome aboard.
her
Are you both
shoulders
finding
slumped,
everything all right?
shuffled
Yes, thank
slowly
you.
down the aisle, her uniform suddenly
Just checking
looking
our seat
ill-fitting.
assignments.
Margot followed, her face twisted in rage. The security officers flanked them, silent but imposing. Together, they disappeared through the open cabin door, leaving behind a trail of tension and disbelief. The door shut with a heavy thud. Silence reigned for a moment, broken only by the faint hum of the engines. David faced Naomi and Leah, his expression softening. He crouched slightly to meet their eyes. His voice, though audible to the entire cabin, was directed at them. Miss Ellis, on behalf of Apex Airlines, I want to apologize personally for everything you have endured tonight. This should never have happened. You are valued passengers, and you deserve far better. Naomi's throat tightened. Leah blinked quickly, tears threatening to fall. Neither spoke, remembering their father's words, "Stay calm." David continued, his gaze steady. Your father has been informed. He insisted on immediate corrective action. Please know that from this point forward, you will be treated with the utmost respect and care. I assure you, this flight will continue without further incident. Passengers exchanged glances, some whispering, a few even nodded subtly, acknowledging the injustice they had just witnessed. Naomi slipped the phone to her ear under the blanket. Dad, she whispered. Victor's voice came through, firm but gentler now. I heard it all. You did well. I'm proud of you both. Leah leaned close, catching the words. Her eyes closed, relief washing over her in waves. The plane remained still at the gate, but for Naomi and Leah, something profound had shifted. They had walked into first class as passengers. Now, they were witnesses to the collision of prejudice and power, and they were no longer invisible. And though the night was far from over, Naomi knew one thing with certainty: their father had turned the tide. The cabin door closed with a final metallic click, sealing the absence of Harper Steele and Margot Whitfield as surely as if the air itself had pushed them out. For a moment the passengers sat in stunned silence, the kind of silence that comes when everyone has witnessed something extraordinary, but no one knows what to say. Naomi's chest rose and fell with steady breaths, but inside she was trembling. Her hand still clutched the phone under the blanket, her father's quiet presence steady in her ear. She wanted to exhale fully, to release the fear and anger that had been knotted tight inside her since they boarded, but it wasn't gone yet. The echoes of Harper's sneer and Margot's contempt still rang in her head. Leah, beside her, sagged back into the seat, her face pale. Her eyes were glassy, but not from tears anymore. What she felt now was exhaustion, the kind that seeped into her bones. She whispered so softly only Naomi could hear, "It's really over." Naomi squeezed her sister's hand. For them, yes. For us, not yet. The intercom clicked. The captain's voice filled the cabin. Lower now, weighted with apology. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. I want to personally apologize for the delay and for the events that occurred in this cabin. What happened was not acceptable. As captain of this aircraft, I take full responsibility for ensuring the comfort and dignity of every passenger. Please know that from this moment forward, that standard will be upheld. His words carried a sincerity that softened some of the tension in the air. A few passengers nodded, one or two even clapped lightly before stopping, realizing it wasn't the moment for applause. Naomi felt Leah's shoulders loosen just slightly. The captain's words mattered. They gave shape to the justice that had just unfolded. The curtain to the galley shifted. Liam, the young attendant who had tried to help earlier, stepped forward. His face was drawn with concern, his movements tentative as though unsure whether he would be welcome. He carried a tray with 2 glasses of orange juice, condensation beading on the sides. In his other hand, a freshly wrapped blanket. He stopped at Naomi and Leah's row, lowering his voice. I should have done this earlier, he said. I'm sorry for what you went through. These are for you, no questions asked. He placed the drinks gently on their trays and handed the blanket to Leah. His eyes were warm, genuine, the opposite of Harper's cold mask. Leah's lips parted in surprise. For the first time that night, a small smile flickered across her face. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thin but sincere. Naomi nodded as well. "We appreciate it." The gesture was simple, but it broke something open inside them, a reminder that kindness could exist alongside cruelty, that decency could still surface even in the most hostile environments. Caleb Ortiz, the young man seated nearby, with earbuds around his neck, leaned forward slightly. "I saw everything," he said, his voice low but firm. "You handled yourself better than most adults would have. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Naomi studied him for a moment. His dark eyes held no judgment, only quiet solidarity. "Thank you," she replied. Caleb gave a small nod, settling back into his seat. But his words lingered like a balm. Thomas Reed, ever composed, finally addressed them again. "For what it's worth, you conducted yourselves with dignity. That matters. People will remember it." Naomi felt heat rise in her chest. Not shame, but something closer to pride. Leah turned her face toward the window again, but this time her reflection looked different. Less small, less afraid. The phone buzzed under the blanket. Naomi brought it discreetly to her ear. Her father's voice came through, quieter now, no longer sharp with controlled fury. "I heard the captain. I heard the attendant. Good. You did exactly what you needed to. I'll stay on the line until you're in the air. But I want you to breathe now. You're safe." Naomi closed her eyes, letting his words wash over her. Safe. It was a word that had felt far away only an hour ago. "We're okay," she whispered. "Leah's okay." Leah turned at the mention of her name. Naomi handed her the phone. She pressed it to her ear. "Dad," she said softly, her voice cracking for the first time all night. "I'm here," Victor replied, his tone gentler than Leah had ever heard. "And I'm not going anywhere. Drink your juice. Rest. You've already won." Leah's lips trembled. She closed her eyes, nodding even though he couldn't see. "I love you. I love you too. More than you know." She handed the phone back to Naomi, her eyes shimmering but dry. Naomi placed it on her lap again, the connection still open. The atmosphere in the cabin shifted. Where there had been coldness and hostility, there was now a strange quiet respect. A businessman in row 4 gave Naomi a subtle nod when their eyes met. Another passenger offered Leah a small smile. Nobody spoke loudly. Nobody made a scene. But the current had changed. Naomi took a sip of the orange juice. The cold liquid slid down her throat, sharp with citrus, almost startling after so much tension. She glanced at Leah, who pulled the fresh blanket over her lap, fingers clutching it like an anchor. For the first time that evening, Naomi let herself lean back fully into her seat. She could still feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins, but beneath it was something steadier. They hadn't broken. The captain's voice returned. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be refueling and completing paperwork before departure. We expect about a 2-hour delay. We apologize sincerely for the inconvenience." Groans came from a few rows back, but no one in first class dared to complain loudly. They had all seen what had unfolded. Liam reappeared with a small tray of chocolates. He set it down quietly between Naomi and Leah. "On the house," he said softly, almost conspiratorial. Leah smiled weakly. "Thank you." Naomi's lips curved upward, too. "Just barely." "You're kind." The young man hesitated, then added, "Not kind enough, not soon enough, but I'll do better." He gave a small nod before stepping away. Naomi stared after him for a moment, then turned back to Leah. See, not everyone's against us. Leah pulled the blanket tighter. I know. I didn't think anyone would say anything. Naomi exhaled. They did, and more will. You'll see. The phone buzzed softly again. Victor's voice, warm but resolute, reached her ear. Remember this moment. Naomi, remember it. Leah, you stood tall when others wanted you small. That's what matters. Naomi pressed the phone tighter, letting the words root themselves inside her. Leah leaned close, listening too. For the first time since stepping into the first-class cabin, they felt seen not just as passengers, but as people. And though exhaustion tugged at their bodies, they sat with their heads held higher than before, bracing themselves for the flight ahead, but knowing they had already changed the story. The plane sat at the gate longer than anyone expected. Ground crew bustled outside, attaching fuel hoses, updating paperwork, coordinating with the cockpit. Inside, the passengers were restless, but the air had shifted from hostility to uneasy calm. Naomi sipped the last of her orange juice slowly, as though savoring every drop, not for the taste itself, but for what it represented, the principle of being treated equally, the validation that their voices had mattered. Her body finally began to unclench, though her mind still replayed every sharp moment of the confrontation. Leah sat curled under the new blanket, staring at the seatback screen, though it wasn't turned on. She wasn't ready to watch a movie or distract herself. She needed stillness, space to breathe. Her thoughts circled around the same haunting question. What if their father hadn't been Victor Ellis? Would they have been marched off that plane in humiliation? Would anyone have spoken for them? The intercom crackled again. Ladies and gentlemen, we expect to depart shortly. We thank you for your patience. Cabin crew, prepare for takeoff. A few scattered sighs of relief rippled through the cabin. The engines rumbled back to life, louder
Welcome
this time.
aboard. Are you both finding
Purposeful.
everything all right?
Yes, thank you.
Naomi reached for Leah's hand, threading their fingers
Just checking
together.
our seat assignments.
You okay? She whispered. Leah hesitated before answering. I don't know. I feel small. Even after everything. Like we had to call Dad to save us. Like we couldn't do it on our own. Naomi studied her sister's face, seeing the shadows under her eyes. We didn't lose. Leah, we didn't give in. And calling Dad wasn't weakness. It was strategy. You know he always says power is a tool. Tonight we used it. Leah bit her lip. But what about the people who don't have that tool? Who just get pushed
Welcome
out,
aboard.
ignored,
Are you both finding everything all right?
shamed?
Yes, thank you.
Naomi's throat tightened. She thought of
Just
the
checking our
countless
seat
stories she'd
assignments.
read online, of families escorted off flights, of passengers whose complaints were dismissed because they lacked influence. She had wondered about those people before, but tonight she felt it in her bones. That's the part I hate most, Naomi admitted softly. We were lucky. Others aren't. Leah nodded, silent tears slipping down her cheeks. Naomi squeezed her hand tighter, wishing she could absorb the pain for both of them. The engine surged louder. The plane began its slow roll away from the gate, heading once again for the runway. Naomi pressed the phone discreetly to her ear. Their father was still on the line, silent now, listening. She whispered, We're moving again. Victor's voice came through, firm but gentler than before. Good. Stay calm. The hardest part is behind you. Naomi exhaled. Thank you, Dad, for everything. You don't need to thank me, he replied. What happened tonight was wrong. My only job was to make it right. Your job was to stand tall, and you did. Both of you. Leah leaned close to catch his words. They filled her with warmth. though the ache remained. I felt like I was breaking, she admitted softly. Victor paused. You didn't break. You bent under pressure, but you didn't break. That's strength. Leah, never doubt it. She smiled faintly, wiping her cheeks. Okay. The captain's voice cut in again, instructing crew to take their seats. Naomi and Leah buckled their belts, the familiar ritual grounding them in the moment. As the engines roared to full power, the plane lunged forward, racing down the runway. Naomi's stomach lifted as the wheels left the ground. The lights of the city fell away beneath them, a glittering map receding into darkness. Leah gripped the armrest, then slowly released it as the ascent steadied. For a long stretch, neither spoke. The cabin lights dimmed, screens flickered on, and the hum of altitude filled the silence. Passengers settled into their pods, pulling blankets, donning headphones, trying to reclaim normalcy. But for Naomi and Leah, there was no return to normal. The cabin was different now, not just in atmosphere, but in meaning. It had become a stage where prejudice was confronted, where silence was pierced, where truth had fought its way through layers of dismissal and contempt. Naomi leaned her head back, staring at the darkened ceiling. Her mind replayed the moment Harper told them to make do, the smirk on Margot's face, the captain's first announcement about a crew matter. Each detail was burned into her memory. She wondered how many other passengers would remember it tomorrow, or whether they would file it away as an inconvenience, a story to tell half-heartedly in a boardroom or dinner table. Leah turned to her, her voice quiet but raw. I hate that it almost broke us. Naomi shifted, facing her sister. It didn't. We're still here, stronger now. Leah studied Naomi's face, searching for proof. Naomi's steady eyes gave it to her. Caleb Ortiz leaned forward from his seat again, speaking softly so as not to intrude. You know, he said, I think you just taught everyone in this cabin something they needed to see. People pretend not to notice things like that. But tonight, no one can pretend anymore. Leah blinked, surprised. Do you really think anyone cares? They'll all go back to their lives. Caleb shrugged. Maybe, but even if they don't admit it, they'll remember. And some of them will act differently next time. That's how change starts. Naomi felt a swell of gratitude. Thank you, she said quietly. Caleb gave a small nod before leaning back. Thomas Reed spoke as well, his voice low but certain. Courage isn't about never being afraid. It's about what you do in spite of fear. You've both shown that tonight. Leah flushed, ducking her head. Naomi met his gaze and gave a single nod. As the plane leveled at cruising altitude, Naomi finally allowed herself to close her eyes. Her father's voice echoed in her head. Caleb's encouragement, Thomas's affirmation. For the first time that night, she believed the truth of their words. But beneath the calm, a deeper current stirred. This wasn't over. Tonight had been about survival, about dignity, about making sure they weren't erased. But Leah's question still hung heavy in the air. What about those who had no one to call? No father whose power could reroute a plane? Naomi knew the answer was not simple. Yet she also knew this night had lit something inside her. A fire. A mission. She couldn't yet name it, but she could feel it burning, shaping her future. Leah shifted under the blanket, resting her head on Naomi's shoulder. Her breathing slowed, the exhaustion finally overtaking her. Naomi stared out the window at the endless night sky. Somewhere below, the Atlantic stretched dark and vast. Ahead lay London, the summit, the recognition they had worked so hard for. But behind them lay something more important, proof that they could endure, and that silence was not the only choice. Victor's voice came one last time before the call ended. "Get some rest, girls. You'll need your strength." "This is only the beginning," Naomi whispered. "Good night, Dad." Leah stirred, half asleep. "Good night." The line went quiet. Naomi slipped the phone into her bag, finally letting it rest. She leaned her head against the seat, closing her eyes. The cabin was quiet now, almost serene. But Naomi knew the silence was not the same as before. It was no longer the silence of avoidance, of prejudice. It was the silence that follows a storm charged, uneasy, unforgettable. And somewhere deep inside, Naomi understood they hadn't just survived tonight. They had made history on this flight, even if only a handful of people knew it. Dawn spilled over the wing like a thin sheet of silver as the aircraft descended through a quilt of low clouds. London appeared by degrees, a ribbon of river, a scatter of slate roofs, a city waking. Naomi felt the change in pressure press gently against her ears. Leah lifted the shade higher and watched the ground tilt closer. When the wheels kissed the runway, a ripple of relief moved through first class. Not applause, more like a collective exhale. Naomi squeezed Leah's hand before releasing it to gather her things. The captain came on the intercom once more. His voice was steady, humbled, sincere. He apologized again. He thanked the cabin for patience. He wished the young innovators traveling today good luck at their summit. His words landed softly, like a benediction over a long night. At the door, David Layton reappeared for a quiet, final pass. He stopped by 1A and 1B and bowed his head. The airline would follow up formally. He promised there would be a written apology. There would be compensation. There would be training and review. But most important, there would be change. He said it plainly. Then he stepped back, allowing the twins to leave the aircraft first. The jet bridge smelled like coffee and rain. Victor Ellis's voice arrived in their ears one last time before they disconnected. He told them where a car would be waiting. He told them to breathe. He told them he loved them and was proud in a way words could not contain. Naomi smiled into the phone, small and private. Leah said, "I love you," and meant it from a place that felt brand new. Heathrow moved around them in soft voices and sensible shoes. Naomi felt a curious lightness in her chest, the aftertaste of fear leaving the body. Leah held her passport like a talisman as they passed through the quiet lines of immigration and customs. A driver in a dark suit lifted a sign with their name, Ellis. He offered 2 bottles of still water and a gentle nod. The ride into the city was muted by drizzle that traced the windows. Naomi watched terraced houses slide by. Leah tracked street names and noted the sudden splash of a red bus that made her smile. They reached the conference hotel with 20 minutes to spare before check-in. A volunteer at the summit recognized their names. Her eyes widened when the words Ellis Sisters left her lips. Everyone online was talking about a grounded flight, she whispered, then flushed, then congratulated them for making it in time. Naomi and Leah exchanged a glance. News traveled faster than sleep. They showered. They changed. Leah tied her curls back with a careful hand. Naomi pinned a simple badge to her blazer. The conference hall buzzed. The stage lights were too bright. The rows of chairs seemed to march forever. The moderator's voice sounded like it came from the ceiling. When their turn arrived, Naomi stepped forward first. Leah followed half a pace behind. They told the room about water, about membranes, about the invisible and the essential. They spoke about failure cycles and about the moment a filter held back what it could not hold before. Naomi spoke with the quiet conviction of someone who had just proved another kind of filter wrong. Leah spoke with the clarity of a mind that had survived a storm. They finished. Silence held for a hair's breadth. Then the room lifted. Not just applause, a standing surge that carried warmth. A judge wiped a discreet tear. A teacher from Mumbai bowed his head toward them as if passing along a blessing. A girl in the third row pressed a hand to her heart. Backstage, Naomi finally felt the full weight of the night fall from her shoulders. Leah leaned against a wall and closed her eyes. For a few long breaths, they did nothing but stand there, alive, unbroken, seen. The Pinnacle Award was announced at dusk when the glass atrium blushed with the last light of day. Their project was called. Naomi felt the world surge forward as if the floor moved under her. Leah covered her mouth, then laughed and cried at once in a sound that felt like home. They walked to the stage. They accepted the curved glass sculpture with both hands. The photo that would later circle the world captured two sisters standing impossibly tall. While the twins were stepping into their future, the other story from the flight finished writing itself across offices and living rooms a continent away. At JFK,
Just checking our seat
Harper
assignments.
Steele sat in a windowless room with a paper cup of coffee gone cold. Human resources began without ceremony. An airline attorney recited policy. A union representative looked at her with a face that had seen every kind of mistake. The report was short. Passenger statements, crew statements, a formal complaint from corporate, a notation from the executive who boarded the aircraft and relieved her of duty. The phrase violation of anti-discrimination policy appeared in black ink that would not fade. Harper said she had been under stress. She said safety came first. She said the passengers were combative. She said the night had gotten away from her.
Are you both finding everything all right?
Each sentence collapsed under the same patient
Just
reply.
checking our seat assignments.
That is not what the witnesses report. The room did not raise its voice. It did not need to. When the meeting ended, Harper's badge lay on the desk like a small fallen flag. Security escorted her to collect her things. The walk from the locker to the curb was longer than usual. The sky was a hard, honest blue. She did not look up. Later, a familiar system updated a line beside her name. Termination for cause. The industry was smaller than it looked from a seat map. Doors that once opened with a smile now stayed shut with a soft electronic click. Across town, Margot Whitfield paced a living room so spare it looked like a hotel suite. She had not slept. Her phone had not stopped. Messages from friends sounded like cautious weather reports. The board dinner was moving forward without her. Unfortunately, the charity committee preferred to avoid distraction. Regrettably, a private note from her husband noted the word untenable. Charles Whitfield arrived with the cold quiet of a man measuring damage. He did not yell. He did not throw a glass. He sat and asked one question. Did you say those words? She offered the old justifications. She spoke about standards. She blamed a terrible crew. She tried on a dozen versions of the story until they all sounded the same. It should not have mattered who the girls were, he said finally. But it does. The father, a strategic partner in sectors Charles could not afford to alienate, did not lift his voice either. He made calls that never made the news. He canceled meetings that had been certain. He moved a contract from one folder to another. The Whitfield's calendar emptied itself over the next few weeks. Invitations evaporated. The silence grew teeth. It began to bite. On the other side of the ocean, Thomas Reed returned to his flat after a day of meetings. He set his paper on the table and poured a cup of tea. the small ceremony of a man who refused to let the world rush him. His phone lit with an American number he did not know. He listened as a calm voice introduced himself as Victor Ellis and thanked him for his courage. Thomas protested that he had done nothing remarkable. Victor insisted that integrity should be honored, not just admired. A week later, a team from Horizon Global Logistics called to explore a packaging partnership for their Green Fleet initiative. Thomas stood at the window with the phone in his hand and watched a slow English rain and allowed himself a private smile. Apex Airlines sent a letter by courier to Naomi and Leah at their hotel. It was printed on heavy stock with careful language that avoided the drama of headlines and instead spoke in clear terms. We failed to protect your dignity. We are taking specific steps to ensure this does not happen again. The steps were listed: training modules with third-party oversight, a hotline that bypassed local managers, a quarterly review with a public report. David Layton signed his name with a pen that left a generous stroke. That night, Victor arrived in London without sleep and with a face that did not show it. The sisters met him in the lobby where he bent down as if they were still small enough to lift. He hugged them long enough to reset something sacred. He asked about their presentation. He asked if they ate. He asked if they wanted to see the Thames by night, or if sleep would be the braver choice. They chose sleep. The river would still be there tomorrow. Before bed, Naomi stood at the window and watched the city that would be part of their story forever. Leah sat on the edge of the bed and traced the smooth curve of the award with her fingertip. Naomi broke the quiet first. Do you think this will matter to anyone but us? Leah considered the question with the care she used on equations. It mattered to the man who spoke up. It mattered to the attendant who found courage too late, but still tried. It mattered to the executive whose eyes changed when he understood. It mattered to Dad. It mattered to me. That is not small. Naomi nodded. The words settled in her bones. She thought of the way the cabin had shifted after the storm, how strangers had found a little more spine, how the captain had let humility into the cockpit, how the plane had landed not just with luggage and people, but with a new story packed into the overhead bins. She whispered a promise to herself that could have been a prayer. Make this count. Do more than survive. In the morning, London looked washed clean. The sisters ate toast with jam in a quiet corner of the hotel, laughing at the sudden sweetness of a simple breakfast. Their father spread a newspaper on the table without saying a word about the small item that mentioned an incident on a flight and a review underway. He let them be daughters again for the space of a meal. Then he walked them to a taxi and held the door. He told them the world would try again. He told them it always does. He told them that tonight had proven they were ready. The driver pulled away from the curb. Naomi watched Victor grow smaller in the mirror until the hotel swallowed him. Leah rested her head against the glass. The city blurred into a pattern of brick and light. Their inboxes were full by noon. Congratulatory notes from teachers. Requests for interviews they did not plan to grant. A message from a girl in Ohio who said she had watched from Economy, crying into her hoodie, hoping someone would do something, and that when the plane turned back, she believed a new possibility was real. Naomi wrote back. Leah wrote back. Their replies were short but full. You are not alone. You are not imagining what you feel. Keep going. We will too. 2 years passed the way water passes under a bridge. Quiet, constant, powerful enough to carve stone. On a gray afternoon in Cambridge, Naomi Ellis hurried up the steps of a brick building that smelled faintly of dust and coffee. The seminar room was full of voices. Slides glowed at the front. Her notes were already waiting on the lectern with the title of her capstone project printed in bold, Equity in Motion, a venture lab for founders from communities that sit at the edges of capital. She breathed in and felt the old rhythm return, the rhythm of a room leaning forward to listen, in a lab across campus. Leah adjusted the focus knob on a microscope and then stepped back to a whiteboard crowded with equations. Her research group had been arguing for an hour about bias in training data sets. Not the kind anyone can see with the naked eye. The kind that hides inside the instructions given to a machine. She listened. She asked the question that sliced cleanly through the crosstalk. What if a model was required to explain itself in language a person could question? The room felt quiet, watchful, and then it came, alive again. Their lives did not turn into a parade. No confetti followed them between classes. They waited in dining hall lines. They fought with printers. They washed their laundry at midnight because someone else always needed the machines. But the night on the plane had not faded. It had become a lens. It shaped their choices the way gravity shapes a river. A message arrived in Naomi's inbox from an organization in Oakland that taught teenage girls to pitch social ventures. Could you speak to our students? Naomi said yes. She traveled with a single carry-on. She told a room full of bright eyes and restless hands about failure cycles in both science and leadership, about the lie that tells you to be smaller, about how fairness is a design problem as much as it is a moral claim. The girls lined up to speak to her after, some with notebooks, some with nothing but a story and a look that said, "Please tell me I'm not imagining this." Naomi told them they were not. She told them to build anyway. Leah took a different path into the world. She wrote code slowly and then all at once. She tested models until they failed and then made them fail in new ways. She liked to walk home late when the streets emptied. The quiet let the day settle. On those walks, she often replayed a single moment from the flight, the captain saying the words "customer service matter" in a voice that shook. She realized it was the first time she had heard an institution admit a crack in its own wall. She wanted to build systems that did not need to be forced into repentance by someone on the outside. She wanted apology and repair written into the architecture. At Horizon Global Logistics, Victor Ellis changed in ways no quarterly report could capture. He still moved freight across oceans and stitched supply into demand. But his eyes looked differently at the companies who came asking for contracts. He asked new questions. Who is in your boardroom? What happens when a customer tells you the truth you do not want to hear? He launched the Ellis Initiative for Dignity and Service, a consortium that connected airlines, hospitality groups, and training firms with civil rights educators and passengers themselves. The work had a simple mandate: make respect measurable, make it impossible to ignore. The airline sent another letter one spring morning, not on heavy stock this time, on simple white paper that named numbers, complaints of discriminatory treatment down 60% in the past year, a hotline that was used and answered, a supervisor who lost her position after a pattern emerged, a captain who asked to repeat a coaching module because he was not satisfied with his first attempt. It was small. It was not enough. It was also real. On a stormy night at a small airport in the Midwest, a flight attendant named Liam closed a galley curtain and took a long breath. He had taken a job with a regional airline and carried a knot in his stomach that refused to fully unwind. He still thought about the twins. He thought about the orange juice he had not served when it would have cost him nothing. He thought about how much easier it is to be kind when the room already rewards it. A mother traveling alone with 2 kids stepped on board, soaked from the rain. eyes wide with exhaustion. Liam crouched to the children's level and offered a secret gift. 2 packets of cookies and a promise that the seatbelt sign would feel like a game of lights in the sky. The mother pressed a hand to her heart. Not all justice is dramatic. Not all repair is loud. Thomas Reed signed a contract in a glass office that looked out over the Thames. He had asked for very little in return for his silence at the time. He had offered his statement because it was the only decent thing to do. Still, the partnership with Horizon lifted his small firm out of its careful survival and into a future he had not dared plan. When he met the twins for coffee during one of their visits to London, he thanked them for the conversation that altered his company's path. They thanked him for reminding them that a witness can carry a story safely to shore. As for Harper Steele, the echo of that night did not stop at the curb outside the employee entrance. Job applications went unanswered. Calls were not returned. The world she had mistaken for permanent revealed itself to be temporary. In a fluorescent lit store off a highway exit, she spent nights stocking shelves and tried not to watch the young people who came and left in laughter.
Are you both finding everything all right?
Yes, thank you.
Sometimes a girl with braids would enter.
Just checking
and
our seat
assignments.
For a moment,
Harper would feel something like fear and something like shame. The feeling passed when her anger returned. It always returned. There was a version of this story in which she learned and changed. She did not choose to live that version. Margot Whitfield moved to a gated community with a golf course where winter did not arrive. The social world that once glowed around her name dimmed to a single lamp. Her husband stopped calling things we and began to call them mine and yours. A mirror does not lie forever. One afternoon, she watched a father show his daughters how to swing. She felt an ache so sudden and clean, she had to sit down. For a moment, it cleared her vision. Then it clouded again. Clarity sometimes asks more than pride can give. On a humid July evening at an airport in Atlanta, Naomi and Leah were seated at a gate waiting for a delayed flight when a scene began to form like a storm cell over the next counter. A black family stood silent while a gate agent, flustered and defensive, insisted their tickets had been reassigned. The words, "Policy and system error, and I cannot do anything about that," appeared in quick succession. Naomi stood. Leah's hand found her sleeve and squeezed once. Then Leah stood too. They did not yell. They did not accuse. Naomi asked the agent to slow down and to look again at the record locator. Leah pulled up the airline app and showed the scan times and seat assignments that had not changed since the morning. Other passengers began to listen. A man in a ball cap stepped forward and offered his status for the upgrade desk if it would help. A woman behind the family asked her teenage son to give up his seat if needed. The supervisor arrived with apologies already prepared. The family sat down together on the plane that night because a room decided to be brave before a phone call had to be made. On their way down the jet bridge, the mother turned and thanked Naomi and Leah with a look that landed deeper than language. Naomi felt heat rise behind her eyes. Leah said softly that this is what systems can learn to do when enough people refuse to forget the lesson. Back in Cambridge, Leah's thesis defense took place in a sunlit room with high windows. She presented a framework that forced machine learning models to explain themselves in clear sentences that ordinary users could challenge. She called it a conscience layer. The committee asked hard questions. She answered them without apology. When it was done, her advisor shook her hand and said that for once the word ethics had sounded less like an afterthought and more like part of the machine. Naomi's venture lab ran its first full cohort in a converted warehouse with long tables and cheap coffee that tasted better because it was shared. Teams pitched to investors who had promised to listen differently. One founder built a platform that lets passengers document bias in real time without losing the safety of anonymity. Another designed a training simulation that replaced the performative quiz with scenarios narrated by people who had been harmed. An older woman who had never thought of herself as a founder created a concierge service that pairs first-time flyers with retired cabin crew who choose kindness as a contract. The room did not look like the rooms that usually hold capital. It looked like a map of the world drawn honestly. Victor came to the showcase and sat in the back. He did not take calls. He did not check his watch. He watched his daughters move through the crowd with the ease of people who know exactly why they are in the room. When all the chairs were folded and the lights were off, he walked with them down the block to a diner that served pancakes at midnight. They ate too much and laughed too loud, and then fell quiet in the way people do only when they trust silence to hold them. On the walk back to campus, Naomi looked up at a sky that never quite goes dark in a city that holds this much electricity. She thought of a cabin lit too brightly and of a voice on an intercom admitting that something was wrong. She touched the small scar on her knuckle from a middle school basketball game and smiled at how the body keeps records. Leah slipped her hand into Naomi's and said the line she had been thinking all night. "We are not done," Naomi answered without looking over. "We were never meant to be." The long echo of that night continued to move through them and around them. It changed strangers. It altered policies. It did not cure the world. Nothing that matters ever does. But it turned a lens so that more people could see. Naomi learned to build rooms where the right thing felt like the obvious thing. Leah learned to tell machines the truth so that people could stop being crushed by errors with no name. Victor learned to keep pushing without needing credit. The captain learned to apologize before headlines insisted he must. Liam learned to act without waiting for permission. Thomas learned that courage is a habit. The mother in Atlanta learned that sometimes help arrives quietly and on time. Every so often, when a plane banks and the city below tilts into a map of lights, Naomi and Leah still share a look that needs no translation. It says we remember. It says we walked through and came out carrying more than we took in. It says the story did not end when the wheels touched down. It is still being written at 30,000 feet and at kitchen tables and in code repositories and in conference rooms where someone who once stayed silent decides to clear a throat and speak. A plane landed. An award was won. Policies shifted on paper. The echo keeps traveling. Tonight was never only about a drink or a blanket. It was about the distance between being allowed in and truly belonging. It was about Naomi and Leah holding their ground without losing their grace. It was about a father who turned love into protection and then into reform. It was about a witness who refused to look away, and about small acts of repair that keep choosing kindness after the cameras fade. Discrimination is not an accident. It is a choice that leaves bruises you cannot always see. We reject it here. We honor the people who speak, who listen, who change. If this story stirred something in you, tell us in the comments. Share your moments of courage and the lessons that came after. Let this community be a place where dignity is the rule, not the exception. If this moved you, please like the video, share it with someone who needs hope tonight, and subscribe so you will not miss the next story. New chapters are coming. Stay with us.